Right, let's dive into Parmenides Fragments 8, specifically lines 36 to 41. Here he's really hammering home a point about time. The core idea is pretty stark. If being is everything there is, complete, entire, and utterly unchanging, then where does time fit in? It can't be another thing existing alongside it, right? Think about it like this. If you have a perfectly full glass of water, sealed tight, nothing else can exist inside that glass. Time, according to Parmenides, is in that same boat with being. He uses the phrase another thing alongside, alloparix, which echoes his earlier arguments against irrelevant additions. And notice the reference to fate, more repethisankati, binding time fast. It's like saying time is destiny-bound to this unchanging reality, not a free-floating entity. There's also a textual clarification here. The reading nor is time, either chronos, makes perfect sense, aligning with Aristotle and even Homer, unlike some later perhaps confused variants. So Parmenides is setting up a fundamental premise, no separate time because being is total. So, if we accept that time isn't a real thing, what happens to our everyday world? This is where Parmenides delivers a pretty harsh verdict. If time doesn't exist, then all the stuff we think is real, the trees growing, the stars moving, the seasons changing, you, me, everything that seems to pop into existence and eventually fade away, well, they're not really real in the way we usually mean real. They only have a name, an honorary title, if you will, honomaste. Think of it like calling a shadow a person. It has a name, but it's not a person. Parmenides says these things are just subjects for our deceptive statements. We say the river flows, the flower blooms, but these are just names we've given to processes that aren't actually happening in the way we perceive them. Mortals, he says confidently, suppose these things are real, and undergo all sorts of changes, coming to be, perishing, shifting their warmth or hardness relative to other things, changing location, even their appearance, diatekroaphanon amiven, changing their bright complexion. But ultimately, Parmenides argues, they won't be found to be anything more than the topics of misleading propositions. They don't truly exist as objects of genuine thought or conception, noein. It's a radical claim, essentially saying the physical world is just a linguistic illusion. Now, let's shift gears slightly within Fragment 8, looking at lines 42 to 49. Having established the non-existence of time and the illusory nature of the changing world, Parmenides turns back to describe the true nature of being itself. He starts with a powerful assertion, since its limit is ultimate, pipiras pimaton. What does this mean? It means the boundary defining being is absolute, final, not leading to anything else. From this, he immediately concludes that being is in a state of perfection from every viewpoint, tetelesmenon pandothen, and equally poised in every direction from its center, isopales pandi. He gives us a vivid image, like the volume of a sphere, spheres goes. Now hold on, is he literally saying being is a giant ball? Probably not in the physical sense. More likely, the sphere represents the highest form of perfection and self-similarity known to the Greeks. Think of how a sphere is uniform in all directions, perfectly balanced. Parmenides argues this perfection stems from the fact that being encounters its limit uniformly everywhere, the apiraskiri, making it inviolate, atsilon, and equal to itself in every aspect, sonaftompim. Because there's no non-being or varying degrees of being to disrupt it, it maintains this perfect, self-contained unity and convergence, aikniste estomon. Let's unpack that sphere analogy a bit more, because it's crucial. When Parmenides says being is like the volume of a sphere, he's not necessarily sketching a cosmic bowling ball. As the commentary notes, the sphere was seen as the most perfect geometric shape, embodying completeness and self-likeness. Think Plato's Timaeus or Aristotle's physics, the sphere is often the ideal form. But Parmenides takes it further. The phrase equally poised in every direction, isopales pandi, suggests something dynamic, not just a static object. It implies a kind of active, balanced unity. And importantly, while he uses terms like volume, ongos, and poised isopales, which could relate to physical objects, the overall context points towards a non-physical reality. Why? Well, Parmenides' own arguments, and later thinkers like Melissus, strongly suggest being isn't a physical body with parts or density, pachos. If it had parts, it wouldn't be one. So, this equilibrium and centre must be understood metaphorically, pointing to a metaphysical, indivisible unity that is somehow perfectly self-contained and active, not a chunk of matter sitting somewhere. Okay, having meticulously described the unchanging, perfect being, Parmenides now pivots. He acknowledges that mortals have their own beliefs about the world, even though he considers them deceptive, apatilon. This section, lines 53 to 61, outlines his theory of the physical world, but framed as a description of what mortals believe. The first big distinction he makes is about how we start thinking about things. He says mortals resolved, katethendo, to name two forms, not one. This is a direct shot across the bows at the earlier Ionian philosophers like Thales, water, Anaximenes, air, and Heraclitus, fire, who tried to explain everything from a single substance. Parmenides argues, quite forcefully, that naming only one form is wrong, or kraionistein. Why two? Because the world we experience involves change and opposition, and a single unchanging substance can't account for that. These two forms, he implies, are fundamental opposites, much like being itself is defined by its lack of otherness. This dualistic setup is key to understanding his take on the sensible world. So, what are these two forms that Parmenides identifies as the basis for mortal experience? He specifies them: light or fire, and night or darkness. Let's look at their characteristics. Light fire is described as ethereal, aerion, gentle, upepton, light, phanon, and importantly, self-identical. Crucially, it's not the same as the other tamkamado. On the flip side, night darkness is characterized as essentially unintelligent, eneraton, dense pikanon, and heavy varin. Notice the opposition. Light is active, gentle, self-identical. Night is passive, dense, heavy, and lacks intelligence. Parmenides sets up this stark contrast, mirroring the structure of his own account of being versus non-being. The idea is that all the phenomena we observe, changes in temperature, texture, location, appearance, arise from the combination and separation of these two fundamental, unchanging substances. This dualism, particularly the emphasis on light fire as female and night as male in other fragments, shows clear Pythagorean influences, but Parmenides applies it in his unique Eleatic framework. Let's dive straight into Parmenides' critique of the physical monists. He's not buying the idea that everything comes from one single substance, like Anaximander's the infinite. Think about it. If you have air, water, fire, and earth, they all have different properties, right? Air is cold, water is moist, fire. Now, if one of these elements was truly infinite, what would happen? Well, Parmenides argues, it would just obliterate the others. It's like trying to put a tiny fish in an ocean-sized fishbowl. The poor fish gets squashed. So the monist idea fails because it leads to logical absurdity. But here's where Parmenides gets clever. He doesn't just say, no, it's not one. He proposes a new model. Instead of one source generating things, we have two fundamental unchanging substances. And crucially, this isn't just about how things come to be, but about their very nature, their essence. He uses the term kraion, which means something like internally determined necessity, echoing Anaximander's idea of pairs, but now applied to this dualistic setup. This is a big ontological shift, moving beyond just cosmology. So if not one, then what? Parmenides makes his choice explicit: light and night. He uses the verb krinesthe, often meaning to decide or to choose, suggesting a deliberate selection. These aren't just any opposites. They're fundamental forms, the bedrock of the sensible world. Think of them as the ultimate archetypes, like Heraclitus saw fire as the logos, or Thales picked water. For Parmenides, humans essentially name everything else based on how it relates to these two primal forces. It's like saying, everything we can perceive is ultimately either lightish or nightish. This decision, this choice of two forms, becomes the second big principle in his physics, following his initial move to reject naming just one thing. It's a foundational act, setting up the entire structure of the physical world as we mortals experience it. Now, what makes these forms distinct? Parmenides calls them schemata, characteristics or signs. But here's the kicker. Unlike the properties of being, which you figure out through pure reason, these schemata are given directly in our experience. They're not discovered, they're assigned. Think of it like categorizing. We see something bright and airy, we call it light. We see something dense and dark, we call it night. For firelight, the key traits are being mild, gentle, light, and importantly, uniform. It's the same as itself everywhere, ton siaf ton toton. Contrast that with night darkness, which is described as solid, heavy, and also uniform within itself. Notice the opposition. Fire is light, night is heavy, fire is gentle, night is... Well, the text doesn't give a direct opposite for unintelligent here, but the contrast is clear. The text mentions loose textured for night, but scholars debate if that's original or a later gloss. What matters is the core idea. Each form has its own intrinsic set of qualities, defining its nature. Why does this dualism work better than monism? Parmenides gives us a neat logical justification. Remember the problem with monism? Trying to make one thing both identical and different from itself. That's a contradiction. By splitting reality into two distinct forms, fire and night, Parmenides neatly sidesteps this trap. Each form is perfectly identical with itself. Fire is always fire, night is always night, but they are different from each other. No more contradictions. It's like saying, is the sky blue? Yes, it's blue. Is it red? No, it's not red. Simple, consistent. This structure also explains why things seem relative to us, because they're mixtures or manifestations of these two underlying absolute principles. Fire, being perfectly uniform, comes closest to the ideal identity of being, but still falls short, and night? It's implicitly defined as the other, the non-fire, the non-light. Parmenides is mapping the perceived diversity of the world onto this fundamental duality. Okay, so the goddess, representing Parmenides' own voice on this way of mortals, lays out this system of light and night. How does she present it? Not as absolute truth, but with a crucial qualifier, ton sigo diakosmon. Panda hikota fatizo. This cosmic order I declare to you, to be likely in its entirety. Why likely? This is key. It's not just fitting, like Odysseus telling Penelope lies that sound like truth. Parmenides is building on Xenophanes' idea that we can have good beliefs, doxa, about things we can't know directly. But for Parmenides, this likeness eikos is special. It's the best approximation possible using a dualist framework. It mirrors the structure of being, simple, self-identical substances, as closely as a system based on two things can get. It's unknowable in the same way being is known, but it's the most rational account we can construct for the world of appearances. It's the likely story, the most plausible explanation given the constraints. And she doubles down on this claim, in such a way that never will any mortal outrun you in good judgment. That's powerful stuff. The verb paralassi means outrun, like in a race. It suggests her analysis, despite being about mortals and thus potentially fallible, provides a standard of judgment that's practically unbeatable. Think of it as establishing Parmenides' cosmology as the reigning champion of explanations for the physical world. It might not be the final word, remember it's doxa, belief, but it's the most defensible, the most robust account available. It's like saying, my theory might not be perfect, but it's the best game in town, and no one's going to knock it off its throne anytime soon. This confidence underscores the importance he placed on this structured, logical account of the sensible world. Having established the principles of his physical world, the goddess now promises to fill in the details. Fragment 9 acts like a roadmap for what's coming next. She vows to explain the origin and behavior of the big players in the sky, the ether, the signs, which likely refers to the planets, the sun, the moon, and the heaven itself. Notice the language, Ephesi pefsiethesis, you will understand, you will learn, you will understand. It emphasizes comprehension, moving beyond mere description. This promise follows directly from her discussion of human beliefs, showing how this detailed cosmology is part of that way of mortals. It's not just abstract philosophy, it's about understanding the world around us, contrasting sharply with the monists who, in his view, understood nothing. This is where the abstract principles of light and night start to get applied to the observable universe. So how does Parmenides structure this cosmos? He clearly separates the ether from the heaven. Think of the ether as the dynamic region above the earth, containing the sun, moon, and planets, the signs. These bodies move through the ether, governed by necessity. Outside this encircling everything is the heaven, Uranos, the outer sphere, possibly holding the fixed stars and the Milky Way. This reflects the prevailing spherical model of the cosmos, likely inherited from Anaximander. Crucially, the movement of the heavens isn't random, it's chained by necessity, anangi. This echoes the language used for being itself. Necessity holds being fast, ensuring its perfection and immutability. Here, necessity ensures the predictable, unchanging motion of the celestial sphere. And notice the phrase pirat akin, to control or master. This hints at a deeper understanding, perhaps even a divine intelligence, governing these cosmic mechanisms. Fragment 10 gives us a glimpse of how Parmenides starts narrating the creation of this physical world. He follows the grand structure of Hesiod's theogony, begin with the primordial elements, then move to the generations of gods and men. What are these first elements? Earth, sun, universal aether, celestial galaxy, and Olympus as the limit. Think of Olympus here not as a mountain, but as the boundary of the physical universe. And the stars? They're described as concentrations of fire, the hot power of the stars. This sets the stage for a cosmogony where these fundamental components emerge, paving the way for the more complex beings and structures that follow. It's a systematic unfolding, starting from the basics. Fragment 11 brings us back to the core principles. Parmenides reiterates that light and night are the foundation. Line 1 says, "Since all things have been given names light and night." This implies that light and night are the underlying substance, the reality behind all the different names we give to physical objects. Line 2 adds, "And since the names corresponding to their powers have been given to these things and those." This means physical objects get their names based on which form's characteristics, hot, cold, light, heavy, they exhibit. From this, Parmenides draws conclusions about the physical world itself. It's all full, pinest in hepleon, no empty space allowed, and both amphoteron. Why? Because neither contains nothing void, ipu thitero metamidon. This logic mirrors his earlier arguments about being, applying the principle of non-void to justify the equality and completeness of the dualistic system. It's a tightly reasoned structure. Finally, Fragment 12 introduces the mastermind behind this physical world, the goddess. Parmenides explicitly states she is the originative cause, pitikon athion, of everything in the realm of human belief, both the tangible and the intangible. She's positioned centrally, in the middle of all things, and meswom pandon, and is the driving force behind all becoming, genesis. This is crucial because it refutes later interpretations, like those of Theophrastus or Alexander, who tried to simplify it down to fire as the active principle and earth as passive matter. Parmenides insists on a distinct, intelligent, divine power governing the physical realm, separate from the forms themselves. She's the architect, the director, the animating force behind the cosmic play. So wrapping up, Parmenides presents a bold alternative to the monist traditions. Instead of one source, he offers two fundamental forms, light and night, shaping the physical world. Our understanding of this world, however, remains within the realm of doxa, belief or likelihood derived from the certainty of being. The cosmos operates by necessity, overseen by a divine intelligence. It's a complex logical system, a cornerstone of pre-Socratic thought that challenged the status quo and paved the way for future philosophical developments.